Malcolm, let me start with this. I was just waiting for you, and I was checking this news that let me get it for you. Twitter labels a video tweeted by President Trump as manipulated media. Now, and this is a big debate in my sector, the tech sector, if the social media platforms should, ban presidential tweet or presidential post. And it's about this topic that I think you also talk about in your book, which is a problem of miscommunication that often is out there. I try to give a message, and you understand something else, or I give a wrong message, and we start to argue since the beginning. What's your picture of the situation at the moment on this political campaign in US and communication and what's going on?
Well, the one of the big ideas in my book was this notion of default to truth, which is the idea that we are hardwired to believe. And so we start from the premise that the communication is true, and then that's our default, and we question that default only when the evidence becomes overwhelming. And when you realize that we are not by nature skeptical, but we are hardwired to be believing, then you understand how problematic some of this deceptive communication is. That
Right.
you will always be able, at least in the short run, to be able to get away with deceptive communication because your audience will always initially believe it. They need to be given a very strong reason to depart from that position. And that's why when we start getting into, particularly, and then you add to that the constraints that something like Twitter, social media at all social media, particularly Twitter, have, which make any kind of nuance and subtlety very difficult. But you realize you couldn't have come up with a more problematic form of communication than Twitter.
By the way, yesterday I think Twitter announced that they will test audio messages, which on one side give you maybe more context of what I'm trying to say. On the other side, I think the moderation of audios on scale, I don't know, good luck with that, but it's definitely not an easy task. But what is the general feeling in US? What do you think is about this political campaign? Is something like business as usual, political campaign as usual? Is it you see something new in the way Trump or Biden, they communicate, they use these platforms, there is a different level of trust? What's your take on that?
Well, it's my take would simply be that this is as is the case all over the world, we're about to have a completely new kind of political campaign where in-person interaction will be limited, and the importance of these kinds of electronic digital interactions has become much greater. And the question is, does that alter does that advantage one candidate over another? Does that alter the kind of competitive balance between these two candidates? Who is going to be better at playing this kind of online game? Since the whole, the campaign has just moved entirely onto the internet. There'll be, for hundreds of years, there's been one way of running a campaign, which is that you go in person from one city to the next and make appearances and shake people's hands, and all of that has gone away.
Right.
So, it's just I have no prediction. I am as curious as everyone else as to how this ends up.
In a way, is exactly your book in action. I mean, is talking to strangers is the de facto mode today. You always talk to strangers. I mean, I was telling you before, I do so many interviews and I read so many comments. And I mean, I deal with strangers basically. And it is incredible how many, problems or prejudice you can have when you talk with someone. You start with your point of view. This is my point. Tell me what you think. My feeling sometimes is that people, they don't want to have a conversation. They just want to show you that they are cool, that they are right, that you are wrong. And no matter what you say, they don't even listen. I mean, they just keep going with their attitude. Is this something that you also researched for your book? You find out is something that makes sense?
Well, this is a condition of online communication where if I'm in a conversation with you and I'm not listening to what you're saying, like for example, if in this interview, every question you asked, I had responded with on a completely unrelated note, right? Very quickly, either the interview would stop or you would say something. You would say, Malcolm, answer my question.
Sometimes just as, I mean, I wouldn't say to you, you can tell me whatever you want because you're Malcolm, but in another situation, yes.
But at the very least, you would get annoyed and you would communicate your annoyance with the fact that I'm rattling on about something and
right.
You want. That kind of immediate feedback doesn't happen online. And that's the kind of problem. There's no way in face-to-face communication, we can discipline each other's responses. And you can't do that as effectively if we're talking entirely online. So there's no, this is a similar point. I was listening to someone here in the States who's famous for doing very hostile, tough interviews with people. And he was asked, does he prefer to do them in person or on the phone? And he said, always on the phone. And he's saying the same thing, which is when you're doing an in-person interview, there are things that keep our behavior in check. It's very hard for me to be unfair or hostile to you when we're sitting across from each other. Much easier on the telephone, and even easier if what we're doing is having an email exchange or an exchange on Twitter. There's no constraint on my behavior.
And what do you think is the way out? If there is a way out, is just that one day we say, all right, let's give up with this social media platform. It was a funny joke for some years of human history, and now let's move to something. Let's be serious now. Or they will just evolve. What do you think?
Well, I think we need to do a better job of understanding what these social media platforms are good for. What they're really good at is sharing information. One-way communication is fantastic. If I want to tell the world that I have a new podcast episode, or if I want to, like you, I've probably shared countless of funny videos, or, like that's an insanely beautiful way of communicating with other people. It's just not two-way communication. It's a different kind of communication. It's sharing, not corresponding. Once we get smarter about understanding the limitations of this, maybe we'll use it better. But you can't have an intelligent discussion.
Got it.
On these kinds of things. We need to move away from that expectation.
Malcolm, I heard you once talking about Bernie Madoff in relation with your new book, and I was really fascinated by what you said. First, because I didn't know that Bernie Madoff he hasn't been caught. He was spontaneously turning on, and I thought, it's impossible. He was caught, but he was not. And the other thing is that he was not really like, I don't know, Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, a super smart, I don't know, guy, super spy. I mean, it was kind of normal. And but he managed to do, big disasters. Can you elaborate on that? I was really interested by that.
Well, I said earlier in the interview about one of the big themes of my book is this idea of default to truth, that as human beings, we evolved as a species to believe each other. That's what makes cooperation, socialization possible. And that has a flaw. And that is, if we are confronted with someone who is set out to systematically deceive us, it is very, very hard for us in the short term to be aware we're being deceived. So with that model, in the movies, they always paint the con man as being this brilliant Machiavellian, extraordinary figure who is possessed of these special gifts that allows him to deceive us. But in fact, that's not true. In real life, you don't need to be a brilliant Machiavellian figure to deceive. You just need to deceive. The issue is not with the deceiver, it's with the deceived. We are, as a group, so naive that anyone can pull the wool over our eyes in the short term. And Madoff is a perfect example of that. There was nothing particularly sophisticated about his deception. It was just that there are so few people in the world of that level of finance who are dishonest in that way that nobody was expecting to be cheated. Why would you be? I mean, I'm 56 years old. I have been dealing with financial professionals for, let's say, 30 years. No one has ever cheated me or even come close. No one's even lied to me, right? So why would I have any expectation that this was going to start now? If I meet someone new, I'm like, sure, I assume what they're saying is they're being on the up and up. That's the loophole that Bernie Madoff and all other con men exploit.
And also he cheated super rich and smart people. I mean, not because they're rich, they're smart, but I mean, often there are also a lot of smart people out there. He didn't cheat on, like people without any kind of education. So there was kind of incredible. And also it was intriguing for me because it was related with our ability to spot lies. And I think I heard you talking at the time about polygraphs. So you were kind of passionate about polygraphs. I don't know if I'm wrong or is something that you were trying to investigate a bit more. Is it right?
Yeah. So the conclusion, the bottom line of almost all research into deception is the same, which is that it is almost impossible to know whether someone's deceiving you. We think we're good at spotting liars. We're not. And the polygraph is a good example. The polygraph is a piece of technology which purports to be able to tell when someone's lying by saying that if you lie, it will be associated with a series of physiological reactions.
Right.
Your pulse will quicken. Your skin conductance will change. You'll start to sweat, essentially. You'll get nervous. Blood pressure will go up. And that's just wrong. Polygraph is good at measuring whether you are emotionally aroused, whether you're distressed, anxious, all those kinds of things. But sometimes it's the truth that makes us. In fact, I would even go further than that. It is more often the case that it is the truth that gets us anxious and nervous than it is lies. If I, the things that are the decision to bare your soul to somebody can be enormously stressful. Well, a polygraph will say if you're bearing your soul that you're lying. No, you're not. You're saying
right.
something. So that's it. It's another. We have incredible difficulty accepting this fact that lie detection is basically impossible.
And did you meet at the end mountain climber, or what was his name, or the super?
Talked on the phone. No. The greatest CIA field officer of his generation, who, despite being the greatest CIA field officer of his generation, was deceived by every single spy he ran when he was CIA station chief in Havana. I mean, it's an extraordinary story, and it was the most amazing story, I think, of the book. But yeah, I talked to him on the phone, and what's interesting was, so here was a man who, like I said, was this legendary CIA operative who, while he was in Havana, puts together this spy network, and every single spy he recruited was a double agent working for Fidel Castro the whole time. And I was fascinated to learn that he was not ashamed of this fact. He was smart enough about human nature to know that even he, someone who was a trained CIA officer, is easily deceived. He accepts this is part of the cost of doing business. If you're a human being, you are, particularly if you're operating in a world that is as rife with deception as espionage, you're going to get cheated every now and again. It's no shame on you. It's just a fact of the business.
But how do you deal at the end? I mean, of this analysis, how do you deal with strangers? How can we better have have a better conversation? How can we have a better understanding, communication? If we are very bad at spotting lies, we are often very stupid as human race. I mean, we are very emotional. For instance, during political campaign, we don't vote based on facts, but based on emotions or these kind of things. What do you think are good actions to take to at least get a little bit of improvement in this?
Well, I think we need to, first of all, be aware of our weaknesses in this area. That's the crucial thing. Is so once I know that I'm really bad, all of us are really bad at detecting lies, then don't place any credibility in your decisions about whether someone's lying to you or not. No, it just means, and it also means that we have to be very wary of the conclusions that we draw in the moment, that they're just not accurate, particularly under conditions of stress. And we should just, I talk at the end of the book about the need for caution and humility. Be aware you're going to be wrong most of the time, and slow down. Be cautious in the kinds of conclusions you're willing to draw about others.
In this moment, obviously, there is this big topic about the Floyd situation, the protest, and so on. Do you think that there is a debate about it? Because, I mean, if you think about police, they have always to take decisions, and they have to jump to some kind of conclusions about someone, if it's dangerous, it's not dangerous. They have to take actions. What kind of debate is going on in this moment in US?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we're having a conversation we should have had 100 years ago. But it's you have to understand the nature of policing in the United States is very different from other Western countries. There is there's a high level of what we term euphemistically police violence in this country that just is not present in Western Europe. Hundreds and hundreds of people are shot. Civilians are shot every year by police. Police are much more likely to use their guns in this country. There's a level of animosity between the general public and the police that's in many communities here that's just not present in other countries. The police have a kind of are militarized in this country in the way they aren't in other. They have the idea that a local police department would have an armored car and automatic weapons and all those kinds of things is commonplace here.
Right.
You might see that in the London Police Department, but if you went to a small town in southern Italy or a small town in the north of, they don't have military equipment in the local police department. They do here. So there has been a culture that's built up around law enforcement that has made effective policing very difficult. And we're now starting to examine the culture. I think that's far overdue.
It's also a weird moment, this one, because this one is happening just after, let's say, during COVID, which was also a really weird period. I don't know, how was it for you? I mean, for me, even if I was, used to work from home for 7 years, I still felt like weird, especially with children at home. I mean, it was a very, very weird situation. Where I live in Brighton, here in UK, we had places being shot that they were open during the war. So that was crazy. It was a completely different situation. And what do you see? I mean, a situation now where you have the Floyd protest and the COVID scenario still going on. How do you balance that? And also there is something changing or not? Because, during the COVID period, people say, well, human beings will change, values will change, because now we understand what does it mean to be in lockdown and what are the real important things. But I don't know if something will really change and what we're talking about will be exactly the same or not.
Well, I think maybe what has happened is because the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, was a kind of everyone put their lives on pause. Um, Everything, your life got greatly simplified. Maybe that allowed people to think more clearly and deeply about the George Floyd case. I think it comes along at a time when it was a lot harder to dismiss it, and your mind wasn't cluttered with 1,000 other considerations. So maybe it was fortunate in some way that during this period of mental respite, this thing happened that required our concentration and attention, and we were able, for the first time in decades, to direct our attention towards this issue.
Got it. It's also, Malcolm, the first time in the history that I probably saw so many videos and clips. Everything has been recorded. I mean, I saw on TikTok a gazillions of videos of protest and police. By the way, it's funny that on TikTok, which is a Chinese platform, you see the US protest, but you don't see the Chinese protest. But this is, like a little detail, but it's interesting.
Very Chinese too. They're quite happy to provide the pipe, but not the water flowing through it.
About the US, I never saw so many videos, like every day, everything. Chinese, zero. The protest in China, pro-China, I never seen anything. But, I mean, it's a moment where this platform, at least, they have this ability of sharing information. But on the other side, you have also a lot of, fake news and this kind of content. What's your relationship with fake news? How do you see them? Because people say, yeah, you have to develop, a critical thinking, but it's not easy, because if we're not good at spotting lies, and there are a lot of professional media manipulators, this is also another interesting point. So how do you deal with information in this moment?
Well, I'm actually a little bit of a skeptic on fake news. I think it has always been the case. There's been a great deal of false information floating around. We might be more aware of it now. But if you and I walked through a small town in Alabama 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and asked people questions, we would get an awful lot of fake news in return, right? People thought that Black people were genetically inferior to white people. They thought that, their knowledge of medical related issues would have been filled with all kinds of superstition. They would be scared of being vaccinated. I could go on and on and on. They would think that fluoride in the water makes people crazy. So there's always been, they would think that communists were, out to conquer the world. I don't know whether this is a new thing. I think that it's because every information is so transparent now, it's really easy to spot the disinformation or the fake news. Whereas before these were things that people felt, but maybe weren't broadcast in the same way. But I would actually say that I think we're doing a better job today than we have in the past in generally educating most people about the way the world actually is.
Got it. Malcolm, when I hear you talking, I always think, gosh, how can you always be so, I don't know, wise, and you always give me the feeling that you really, have a deep knowledge about a topic, or if you have an opinion about something, you have very good source of information that you based your opinion on. Help me to understand what's your, let's say, media diet. Where do you get your information to fact check, to develop your critical thinking, and to approach better all the news that every day you deal with? If it's not a secret recipe.
Yeah, there is no secret. I mean, the biggest thing is that because the nature of my job, I'm just finishing on my current season of revisionist history. It takes me 6 months. It's 10 episodes. Each episode is about a different topic. And each episode requires me to interview and learn about something that is largely new. So I have a job that requires me to investigate new ideas constantly and to constantly be exposed. So I could, if I made a list of all the things that I now know something about as a result of just this last season of revisionist history, you'd be huge. I mean, I learned about, the first episode was about hoarding. I knew nothing about hoarding. I sat down with the world's expert on hoarding for many hours and read his books. And
what is hoarding?
hoarding is the compulsive collection of objects. You know, the people whose houses are filled with junk.
Okay, cool.
You know, I bring it up as a random fact, but it's something that affects perhaps 5% of the population. I would say that before this season, I knew nothing about that. Now I know something. A couple of episodes in this season are about the American firebombing of Tokyo in March of 1945, something I knew nothing about, and now I know something about. I probably read, 30 books just to prepare for this season. So it's like, if you have a job that requires you to constantly be exposed to new ideas, it gives you an enormous advantage, right? But everyone's job is like that. You know, if I was a medical doctor, I'm constantly learning about medicine. You know, it's just so happens my job exposes me to a broad number of things.
That's a good point. Let me go deeper on that, because I think it could be very interesting also for my community. When you get exposed to a new idea, there is this border, there is this difference between something that is a new idea that will become the new scenario, and something that is a new idea that maybe doesn't make sense at all, or maybe it's a conspiracy theory, and I don't know, it's coming out this 5G, and then the news is, all right, 5G creates coronavirus. So it's something, let's say, new, and you have to decide, all right, this is a conspiracy theory, this doesn't make sense or make sense. How do you go, what's your evaluation process of a new idea to establish if it makes sense or not?
It's credibility. Well, I mean, I think the answer is it's all about where you start. So I always think you should start at the center and then move outwards. So don't start with the fringe ideas. Start with the established conventional wisdom, the thing that most experts in a given field believe. Master that, or at least appreciate that, and then start asking questions and, investigating the heretics or the skeptics. If you do that, you at least know where the consensus lies, and you protect yourself against going down crazy rabbit holes. Sometimes you end up disagreeing with the consensus, but I think it's always wise if you would like to entertain unusual, outlandish, skeptical ideas, you must understand what they are being skeptical about, right? If you want to believe that 5G causes coronavirus, then you need to spend a lot of time understanding what is 5G and what is coronavirus. Yeah. Then you can start entertaining that crazy notion. But I think a lot of people who do that, they don't know the first thing about 5G, and they don't really understand anything about virology. So that strikes me as being problematic.
Marco, it is funny because I've interviewed Yuval Noah Harari, and he said, "Look, my recipe is this. The first thing I ask, we were talking about COVID. First thing I ask is, do you know what a virus is? If the person respond no, I don't want to know anything else about that topic from that person. So yeah, so start from the center and then try to go deeper. Tell me something about this moment in your book, because this is the first time. You obviously had some incredible successful books in the history, but this time your book is out in a very different period, historical period. And for instance, I think bookstores here in UK are still closed. maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, they were closed in several countries, and maybe now they start to reopen. But is not the classic. All right, I'm coming out with the book. I do the bookstore tour or whatever. So how do you deal with this? Do you have any suggestion or creative approach to come out with the book in this tough time?
Well, I got lucky because I did an audiobook, a special audiobook, where I produced it like a podcast with all of the, with all original tape and archival tape and interview tape and theme music and scoring. And from the beginning, my audiobook has outsold my print book. And what's happened in all of this lockdown, I think, is just that people are just, I look on the American charts and I see that my audiobook is in the top 10 and has continued to be ever since it came out. So it's been unaffected by all of the COVID. And so I think, I got lucky in that sense that I had a book that was available in a form that was unaffected by all of this craziness.
The audio explosion, by the way, is incredible. Did you see the Joe Rogan deal, Spotify $100 million deal? For me, it's really interesting because I feel like there is a new way of creating content, and instead of selling your company, you can just give the rights to a platform, and it's a new way. It's a new way for people who create content. And I don't know. I mean, you obviously had a very successful podcast, but what's your experience so far about this new medium that, by the way, give all the podcaster a great freedom that I never had in television. For 7 years, I had a television show, and I never had the freedom of saying whatever I wanted or talking with any kind of guest I wanted.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's given people like you and I, you and me, and this incredible opportunity that we no longer need to be part of a major media organization in order to reach our audience. And I think of this as the golden age. You can. My podcast company is 28 employees, and we are going toe to toe with people who have 20,000 employees. It's like
crazy.
It's an amazing opportunity. And it's given us. We have control. We have freedom. We have the ability to try crazy things. We have known looking over our shoulder and saying no. It's this upheaval has some in the media landscape has had some really extraordinary, wonderful side effects for people like myself.
Tell me more about your podcast company, because everyone knows, Malcolm Gladwell. All right, good. But are you leaving it as a CEO, as a shareholder? Are you in the day by day? Are you just giving strategies, supporting with, I don't know, promotion or some content? How does it work?
Well, I started it with one of my oldest friends, Jacob Weisberg, and he's the CEO and does the day-to-day operations. And my biggest contribution to the company is my podcast, Revisionist History, which is continues to be our flagship podcast. But also I do a number of other creative projects under the umbrella of the company. So I'm more on the content side, and Jacob is the one running the show.
Got it.
So that's the way our partnership works, and it's worked very well so far.
Couple of questions more, Malcolm, and then I'll let you go running, because you'll go running and I'll go play table tennis. I bought a table tennis robot that I'm really happy about. But if you're passionate about sport, each of us has different kind of obsession. What about books? I was curious to understand, how do you pick a topic? Why you say, all right, this is the time to write Talking to Strangers or Outliers? It's just your curiosity that fire up in a certain moment of your life and you say, all right, now I go into this. But I assume that it takes also a lot of time. You do a lot of research. So what's your process to come out with a new book? And if you're already thinking about something next?
Well, it's really just, is there a story I would like to tell? I'm a storyteller, and I'm drawn to stories that have interesting characters, twists and turns, multiple layers that allow for. My ideal book is a book where you draw someone in with a powerful story, and then you uncover all kinds of new dimensions that the reader didn't, or the listener hadn't thought of, right? So, you start talking about something and you say, wait a second, it's connected to this, and it has this dimension, and it has this unusual aspect. And as they get deeper and deeper into the story, they understand more and more. They get a bigger and bigger picture of the issue. So I'm looking always for that phenomenon.
Got it.
Things with layers, things with unexpected twists and turns. So in Talking to Strangers, that this idea that we're bad at knowing whether we're being deceived is a deeply counterintuitive idea. And the idea of sort of looking at that notion in a number of different contexts, I think is fascinating. I mean, it's an issue in the world of espionage. It's an issue in the Amanda Knox case. It's an issue in police violence in the United States. It's surprising how many times versions of that problem pop up.
And when you write a book, do you kind of understand where the concept that will resonate with the readers is? I'll give you an example. The 10,000 hours theory that you popularized, it became like, I remember there was a period of time that every time I went to an event, a slide came out with, right, your face, with hair everywhere, the 10,000 hour theories. And I say, oh, come on, guys, that's it. I mean, it's not possible that all the time. And then the other wave, no, but it's not really 10,000 hours. It's 12,000 hours and 300. I mean, so it was really resonating a lot. Did you immediately understand that? Or is something that just happened? Right.
No, I think I never in my wildest dreams thought that would be the meme that came out of that book. But so you can't predict these things. But what happens is you write a book, and if you have enough of those interesting kind of complicated ideas, you hope that at least one of them will catch people's imagination, as that did. So I was as delighted and surprised as everyone else about the way that idea took off.
Are you changing now the 10,000 hours, or are you still on 10,000 hours? Just so that I'm updated on how many hours do I need?
Well, no, people misinterpreted it. It's not supposed to be. The point of that discussion was that it takes so long to master something complicated that you need help. That was my point. I was trying to get people away from the idea that you can do it all yourself. And also, people got very obsessed with this with respect to sports. And I don't think sports is... I wasn't talking about sports. I was talking about computer programming and chess and, brain surgery. So I'm a little mystified by, I don't think it takes 10,000 hours to be. Maybe it does. I don't know. But that's not where my focus was.
I totally agree. Final point, Malcolm. If Donald Trump is calling you tomorrow, I don't know if he's calling you, or maybe already called you. I don't know. But I mean, if Trump is calling you and say, "Hey, Malcolm, I'm a tremendous need of your help. What should we do in US in this moment to have a better, communication between citizens and conversation between politicians and citizens? What would you recommend to do based on your Talking to Strangers book?
I mean, I would tell him to reform his own behavior. I mean, I think when you have the leader of your country who is engaging in every form of bad behavior around communication, calling names, dividing people, calling people names, dividing them, jumping to conclusions, assuming the worst about things. I think that there's something very beautiful about the idea of default to truth, and that we're wired as human beings to believe each other. And what you want is a leader who espouses that, who takes at the core of that idea is the idea that you should accept people at face value. You should trust everyone, and then amend that if necessary, but enter into relationships with an expectation that the relationship will work and people are acting in good faith. He does not do that. I would rather have a leader who does.
Fantastic. Malcolm, thank you so much. Talking to strangers. Good luck, really. And it was a big pleasure to have a chat with you.
Good. Same to you.